Welcome to the December 15th edition of Going Viral at GoingViral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman, joined in California with Ken Aaron, and here on the East Coast we have Dennis Goldstein, Michael Jankowitz, and myself, Jim Dingeman, and we're going to soon have Alex Stavropoulos. Let's go over some of the headlines today. Well, it looks like the Biden Mansion talks have hit a snag, and it's imperiling the Build Back America program on Capitol Hill. It looks like it's snagged on the issue of the child tax credit. And so this has not seemed to have budged Senator Joe Manchin. So we'll see how this works out. The Federal Reserve Bank today pivoted on issues of tackling inflation, and they forecast 3.22 to essentially even out inflation. Now that's interesting and significant because inflation rates going up during the progress of a midterm election will only hurt and make it more difficult for the Democrats to fight back. So if a domestic spending plan like the Biden Mansion, Biden Build Back Better America Better, interesting development. Also, Meadows has referred to the Meadows referral to the Department of Justice still has to play out. We just have to see how Merrick Garland is going to deal with this issue. Now, you also have another windstorm blasting through the central United States in the midst of President Biden right now being in Kentucky and traveling throughout the state to look at tornadoes. And we have another tornado warning occurring throughout the entire country in the plains right now. So we'll see how that develops as time goes on. Now, let me just go into some of the news that is elsewhere happening. And this has to do with the situations in Africa. And let me just pull this up a little bit. We're going to play later on a piece from France 24 that talks about the fact that the French army has now withdrawn from the eastern part of Mali, where it has been for almost 8 or 9 years fighting against jihadists. And there was a whole incident there where a convoy was going from Burkina Faso into Mali, and it encountered demonstrations stopping it, where there actually were armed encounters and shootings of Africans. And it's interesting that the Prime Minister of France is going to come to Mali for election purposes inside France next week. So this piece will get into that in greater detail, and it should be interesting to talk about. We also have the death of Bell Hooks, who is a famous black feminist intellectual scholar. And we're going to play a little bit of pieces that have to do with her. She died at the age of 69, a very influential person in the whole world of black studies and feminism. That's Bell Hooks, who died at the age of 69. We're also going to handle later the Julian Assange case. Alex is right now monitoring something, Alex Stavropoulos, and he'll join us as soon as that is finished. Also today, Derek Chauvin pled guilty to civil rights charges in the killing of George Floyd. And we'll see how that develops too. Now, the House panel has gathered a mountain of evidence as it now focuses in on Trump links. We're talking about the panel that's examining the January 6th insurrection. They've interviewed 300 witnesses, and they've had over 30,000 documents already turned over to them. So we're going to see how that evolves and keep an eye on that as we do our show in the weeks to come. This is quite interesting given the fact that we have another report of how Omicron is now everywhere. It is predicted to triple in its impact in the United States during the next few weeks. And by January, it'll be the largest source of new infections in America. Now, another story to talk about. besides the inflation, which I think is a very important one, is there as a result of the rise of Omicron. There are all sorts of basically people freaking out in the United States. So NYU in New York University has basically canceled events. The Metropolitan Opera in New York City has said it will mandate booster shots for all the staff. Right now, they're talking about, you're not protected from Omicron. If you've had 2 shots, you have to get a booster shot. Again, we have different opinions on this show about this, but that is where the scientific discourse is at this period of time. But let me just now, I wanted to do something that we've not really done, and this was a very interesting piece that appeared on the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung website. Now, Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is essentially an academic institution that is essentially a socialist institution that is funded by the taxpayers of Germany. And Germany has an interesting structure where different political parties are actually allowed to fund intellectual think tanks that are basically broadcast around the world. And so this is a little something that's a little offbeat to us. This is an animated piece, but it's a piece talking about the issue of growth. This is a vision of some's attitudes towards how to deal with the situation we're facing in terms of what's going to happen if we have to change the economies. But I wanted to play this just a few minutes. It's a piece that was, I just got it in my email today, out of the blue. And it's from the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung Institute, which, as I say, is spread out at think tanks all over the world, including New York City and different parts of the United States. I think there's one in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Let's hear what they have to say.
We are taught that buying more things right now is good for us and for the economy. We are not taught that if everyone used as much energy as the average American, we would need 5 planets. We are also taught to do things that grow the economy and maximize short-term growth. But luxury condos earn money quicker than community health clinics. Arming millions for war swells the economy more than conflict mitigation. Instead of extending the life of our products to reduce waste, we're encouraged to replace our electronics every year and buy new clothes every season. Our economy is based on our right to consume, but not our right to live. But the soil must be fertile for us to eat. The air and water must be clean for us to live, to plan for the future, to find meaning in our lives. How can the economy be reassembled to grow these things? This is the core of degrowth, which embraces a care-based economy, meaning we produce in accordance with ecological limits and divide it up to fulfill everyone's needs. To think of work that does not inherently require consumption or mass production and instead sustains life. Teaching children how to read, restoring acres of soil, helping people heal from trauma. These are all degrowth. A society that defines productivity and labor not by profit, but by time dedicated to oneself, to family, friends, and to activities that affirm one's humanity. By organizing ourselves around the principles of care, sufficiency, and autonomy, we also reduce our consumption of energy and materials. Imagine a world that measures wealth and prosperity not by how life is destroyed, but how life is created, supported, and nourished. A world that ensures future generations clean air, water, and soil. It's more than possible. It's necessary. Degrowth is a movement to unlearn the dominant ideology of infinite growth that has been ingrained in every aspect of our individual and collective lives.
All right, and that was a little short animated piece. I actually would think that it'd be interesting to see other pieces like that on alternative visions of the world produced, and hopefully one can find that, because that sort of found a little interesting, a little eco-socialism, if you will, German style. Now let me just start here. I want to play this piece from the NewsHour tonight of Bell Hooks. This is done with about 6 minutes in length, but this is Judy Woodruff and interviewing someone who is a friend and colleague of Bell Hooks, talking about the significance of her.
Author and feminist Bell Hooks died today at the Age of 69. She was at home, surrounded by friends and family. Amna is back with a look at her work and her legacy.
Born Gloria Jean Watkins, Bell Hooks grew up in segregated Kentucky in the 1950s and 60s. The daughter of a janitor and a maid, Hooks left home to attend Stanford University, where she earned an English degree. She went on to earn a PhD and then authored more than 30 works under her pen name, which was taken from her great-grandmother. Her prolific writing spanned poetry, essays, and children's books, examining the intersection of race, politics, and gender, and making her one of the most influential Black feminist scholars of the last half-century. In 2004, Hooks returned to Kentucky to teach at Berea College and later founded the Bell Hooks Institute there. Here to talk more about her life and its impact is Imani Perry. She's the Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. Professor Perry, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
You reacted to the passing of Bell Hooks on Twitter by sharing this thought. You wrote, "For exactly 30 years, she was not only an intellectual influence, but a presence in my life." Professor Perry, tell us about the impact that Bell Hooks had on you.
Well, I met her when I was 19 years old. I was an intern at South End Press, where she published much of her work, and she was a teacher to her core, even though I didn't have her in the classroom. She brought ideas alive. She is a person who bridged the space between high critical theory, European scholars and intellectuals, Marxist thinkers, and everyday life. And she wrote and spoke in a way to make all of that theory applicable to our daily lives. And also, she wanted it to bear upon the way we thought of each other ethically, our relationships, our personal stories. So she was both an intellectual, and she was also a kind of a curate, like a person who tended to souls as an educator. And so to be brought under her wing as a teenager was incredibly influential. It allowed me to imagine how to live a life of the mind, but also how to pursue, right relation to other human beings in my midst.
So as we mentioned, she was born Gloria Jean Watkins. She took the pen name Bell Hooks, which was her great-grandmother's name. What do we know about why she took that name, and why all lowercase when she used it?
Yeah, I mean, it was consistent with leftist organizers of the era to think of the individual in the lowercase, that one spoke in the collective. Right? So her name was both an homage to her great-grandmother and the women who came before, but also was a kind of humility to choose the lowercase. And, she was very much, she traveled the world. She had a massive influence. She was a Southern country woman to her core. And she'd never lost touch with that, and so there was a kind of intimacy with that identity that she held on to. Through her pen name, as it were, but I always called her Gloria.
And she mentioned those Southern roots, growing up at the intersection of racism and sexism. She actually spoke about it in this 2016 talk at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. Take a listen to what she said.
I think that many of us as females find sexism is so normalized, whereas people of color, Black, brown, whatever, when we hear a racist joke or racism spoken not as a joke, we really feel assaulted in our sensibilities. But sexism is such a woven into the fabric of our daily lives that I think it's harder for people to resist.
Professor Perry, how did that lived experience show up in her work?
Well, she told a lot of stories from her own life. She in many ways was an open book. She allowed herself to be vulnerable. And she contemplated, so the way that she engaged with people, and she was outspoken and she could be really challenging, was to open that up, to explore those questions of internalized sexism, internalized classism. How do we love each other? So that kind of exploration that was consistent with who she was. And for me, it allowed me to think all of the sort of academic things I was pursuing, they boiled down to the very core about how we are going to live and how we're going to coexist on this planet, right? That's who she was.
It has been 4 decades since her first full-length book, Ain't I a Woman, was published. And you have to note that a lot of the ideas she brought up back then about Black women and feminism and white feminism and the intersection of race and sex and all of these things, we're still talking about those things and grappling with them today. What do you think the legacy of those ideas that she raised 4 decades ago is today?
Well, I think her legacy is enormous, and part of this incredible body of work that she created, the legacy that's found is there's so many young people. The first time they start to think seriously about class, about sexuality, about gender, about identity, about vulnerability, about spirituality is through her work. Her work has never gone out of press. That Ain't I a Woman you can still purchase, right? And so the legacy is actually in all of us who have been influenced by her work, not just in academia, in every sector of the society, in organizing and nonprofit worlds and corporate America. And so, it really she has shaped several generations of thinkers and of people who are members of communities. And so I hope that at this moment, it becomes a time for us to reflect on how much she helped us think, how much she helped us grow, right? And how she pushed the world closer to justice.
An incredible life and an enormous loss. Professor Imani Perry, Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and that was a news hour talking about the sort of legacy of Bell Hooks. I just wanted to play a little bit of her talking directly to actually hear it from the horse's mouth, if you will. This is in just a few minutes of this we're going to listen to. This is Bell Hooks talking on a show called Speaking Freely. And you'll get a sense of what she was like by listening to her talk to this interviewer here.
Bell Hooks is a noted author, scholar, and social critic. She's written 22 books, all of which are in print, including this thoughtful and thought-provoking Communion, The Female Search for Love. I'd like to read to you from your own book a line that says, "This book is testimony, a celebration of the joy women find when we restore the search for love to its rightful, heroic place at the center of our lives." Tell me about that.
We've always thought of our heroes as having to do with death and war. And, when we think of Joseph Campbell and the whole idea of the heroic journey, it's rarely a journey that's about love. It's about deeds that have to do with conquering, domination, what have you. And so part of what I wanted to say to people is that living as we do in a culture of domination, to truly choose to love is heroic. To work at love, to really let yourself, understand the art of loving.
You say in the book there were revelations for you after the age of 40 about love, that there were insights you gained that you wished you'd had earlier?
Well, absolutely, because I think that, like so many other people in our culture, I had very, very confused ideas about love. And, in the first book, All About Love, one of the ideas that was really hard for people to accept was that if somebody is abusing you, they're not loving you. You would think that would be a basic understanding most of us would have, but in fact, so many of us in our childhoods that we really need to cling to the idea that if someone hurts you, they can also be loving you. And I tried to make a big distinction in that book between care and love, that like saying that my parents cared for me deeply, and care is important. A lot of children don't receive any care, but it's only one ingredient of love.
Now,
It is not love.
Love is...
All right, so and that's Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks died today. An immense impact she had on all sorts of ideas about self-feminism. She influenced many people. I've had the pleasure to actually hear her several times. But I wanted to turn to Alex Stavropoulos. Alex wanted to talk about the case of Julian Assange. So, Alex, let's go to it.
Okay. So we're going to play what Chris Hedges did, because he had Joe Loria on, who's, again, of course, with Consortium News and has done extensive coverage. Some of the best coverage of the case. So he knows it, backwards and forwards. He's also, of course, a former UN correspondent for the Wall Street Journal and I think Boston Globe at one time. All right, just a second. Let me get past this.
Wants to spend on behalf of Israel. Most of
Okay. Let me jump forward a little.
With editor-in-chief of Consortium News, Joe Lloyd.
So I'll play a few minutes of this and then put full screen.
One of those pillars out, and this whole case, her whole decision.
Check the sound, please, Alex.
Was based on the U.S. assurances that he would not be put in those special administrative measures. He would not be sent to ADX Florence, Colorado. That was enough for the high court judges. They even say at one point in this 27-page ruling that they don't even have to bother going through the rest of the case because this was enough. This is sufficient for them to overturn Barait's.
Alex, we don't see the video.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. I forgot. It's been a while.
Just go back to the beginning and check the sound, pass through the sound.
Great, okay. Let me go back.
There we go. It looks like
he is in Australia, so it's.
I know, but it looks like my brother-in-law. Looks like my brother.
Oh yeah. Oh, well, Joe's grown a beard recently. If you follow.
Okay, full screen, and full sound.
Assurances that he would not be put in those special administrative measures. He would not be sent to.
There you go.
Colorado. That was enough for the high court judges. They even say at one point in this 27-page ruling that they don't even have to bother going through the rest of the case because this was enough. This is sufficient for them to overturn Barait's decision and send it back to the court with the instructions to have the Secretary of State decide whether to extradite him or not. They explicitly believed the United States when they promised that they wouldn't do these things to Julian Assange. They called them a solemn undertaking between two governments in a diplomatic note.
$20 million per day. That's how much of your tax money Congress wants to spend on behalf of Israel.
Some attack out on Israel, too.
On Friday, the British High Court in London overturned an earlier lower court decision blocking the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. The ruling sends the case back to the magistrate's court with instructions to allow the extradition to be approved or denied by the British Secretary of State for Justice. The ruling, which included a decision to continue to hold Assange in a high-security prison, is a severe blow to the WikiLeaks co-founders' efforts to prevent his extradition to face charges under the Espionage Act in the United States. The extradition is now in the hands of the Secretary of State for Justice unless Assange's lawyers, as expected, file an appeal within 2 weeks to the UK Supreme Court. District Court Judge Vanessa Baraitser ruled in January that Assange could not be extradited because of inhumane conditions in U.S. prisons that would make Assange, who suffers from physical and mental health issues, a suicide risk. The United States, in appealing the decision, gave assurances that Assange would receive adequate medical and psychological care and would not be subject to measures commonly used in high-profile cases such as prolonged isolation and special administrative measures known as SAMs, which impose draconian rules limiting any communication and allows the government to monitor meetings with attorneys in violation of attorney-client privilege. The U.S. attempt to extradite Assange has been widely condemned by civil liberty organizations, including Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, the International Federation of Journalists, the American Civil Liberties Union, and Human Rights Watch, which have called it an existential threat to press freedom. If extradited to the United States, Assange, who oversaw WikiLeaks publications of documents and videos that exposed U.S. war crimes, corruption, lies, and a range of other illegal and nefarious activities, faces a 175-year prison sentence. Joining me to discuss Friday's ruling and its implications is Joe Loria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. So we were both watching via video link the reading of this ruling. I'm just going to begin at the very end, and then I want to go through it with you, Joe. It said the panel, two panels of judges rejected grounds 1 and 3 and 4, but allowed appeal on grounds 2 and 5, and essentially green-lighted this extradition process. Assange's lawyers have 2 weeks to appeal. They have long said to the UK Supreme Court, they have long said that they would do that. But let's go through the case. So we have a ruling on January 4th by the district court judge, Baretzer, who, this is a quote from her ruling, his mental condition is such that it would be oppressive to extradite him. Let's just talk about that ruling, and then, of course, the challenge that the United States, the Biden administration, has made to appeal her decision not to extradite Julian, not on the charges, but on the U.S. prison conditions and on his own mental health.
This is it. The original Hero by medium weight French Terry.
Well, there were two pillars to her decision. One was indeed his mental condition, which 2 defense experts said would lead him to commit suicide, even if he just learned that he'd be extradited before he even left the UK. And the other part of her decision, the other pillar, was the conditions of U.S. prisons, in particular, as you mentioned, the SAMS, ADX, Florence in Colorado, and also to be put in SAMS in ADC, Alexander Detention Center, pre-trial. What these high court judges did today was knock just one of those pillars out, and this whole case, her whole decision collapsed. And the pillar that they destroyed was based on the U.S. assurances that he would not be put in those special administrative measures. He would not be sent to ADX Florence, Colorado. That was enough for the high court judges. They even say at one point in this 27-page ruling that they don't even have to bother going through the rest of the case because this was enough, this is sufficient for them to overturn Baretz's decision and send it back to the court with the instructions to have the Secretary of State decide whether to extradite him or not. They implicitly, explicitly believed the United States when they promised that they wouldn't do these things to Julian Assange. They called them a solemn undertaking between 2 governments in a diplomatic note. The judgment says there's no reason why this court should not accept the assurances as meaning what they say. There's no basis for assuming that the USA has not given the assurances in good faith. Of course, the Assange's lawyers in the high court hearing at the end of October argued strenuously that these assurances could not be trusted. Amnesty International called them inherently unreliable, for example. And there's a history of the U.S. not keeping these promises, despite James Lewis, the British prosecutor for the U.S., saying the U.S. has never, ever broken a diplomatic promise like that in its entire history, which of course raised plenty of eyebrows around the world. As I said, it's a solemn matter. We do not accept that the U.S. refrained for technical reasons to not put them into the extradition hearing, because the other issue that the U.S. that Assange had brought up was of the timing. Should these assurances have been given during the extradition hearing, which ended in the end of September 2020? Could they be allowed to be put in afterward? Were they new evidence or not? High Court ruled it was not new evidence. It could be put in at any time. They cited law. So they are buying these assurances, and it was their way out of this situation. They wanted to find a way to overturn the decision not to send him. They did not challenge the Baretz's findings on the mental health. They basically uphold what Michael Koppelman and Quinton Dealey, the 2 defense experts, said about Assange's mental condition, his Asperger's, for example, and that makes one 9 times more likely to commit suicide, etc. They accepted all that. They did sharply criticize Koppelman on this minor issue that the Americans brought up. They sided with them, with the Americans, the High Court did, on whether he should have revealed in his first report whether Stella Morris, Assange's lawyer and fiancée, had had children or not, about their relationship. He'd hidden that because of safety concerns for Stella Morris and the children. And Baretz accepted that even though Koppelman misled the court, she accepted that it was for humane reasons and understandable. Now, what were those threats to Morris and the children? They came from UC Global. UC Global, the Spanish security firm, a contractor of the Central Intelligence Agency. And I challenge anybody to look at that 27-page ruling on Friday and find the word Central Intelligence Agency or CIA in there. It doesn't exist. And it was brought up not only at the extradition hearing in September 2020, the UC Global testimony of a former partner and a former employee, but with a lot more detail in the October High Court hearing. They allowed, for some reason, these two judges allowed the Assange lawyers to talk about the Yahoo story that most people know about now. That this plot was fleshed out. What they'd heard in the extradition hearing the previous year was with many more details about how the CIA seriously considered kidnapping or assassinating Julian Assange, and his lawyers, Assange's lawyers, argued that he could not be sent to a country whose intelligence services had been seriously considering murdering him. This was all ignored. In fact, Mark Summers, Assange lawyer, at the end told the High Court judges, you ought to read this article. It's pretty interesting. If they read it, they probably did. They totally ignored it. The CIA is not mentioned at all in this, and it's crucial to this case. I just want to say, Chris, this is a very dark day, as you point out, for press freedom. And then really, the US and Britain are acting like tin pot dictators, throwing any press critic into a dungeon. What is left of a democracy that's on life support anyway, if Assange is actually extradited to the United States? It's a very, very bad.
Okay. So to add to the details, again, they completely ignored the extensive evidence, again, that, U.S. government spied on his conferences with his Julian Assange's with his own lawyers, which again should immediately have thrown the case out, into the dumpster. Because remember that's exactly what happened with Daniel Ellsberg, and Daniel Ellsberg himself, who's of course a supporter of Assange, has made this point. Again, even Daniel Ellsberg, well, I think there was some vague stuff about Nixon wanting him literally killed, but nothing about there actually being a literal plot to make it happen by the CIA. The other thing that they didn't have time to get into here is that basically, again, they're ignoring that evidence. They again ignored all the First Amendment issues or press freedom, and they seem to have basically kind of taken a British view of that, which of course Britain does not have First Amendment. They have a very strict Official Secrets Act, which actually the U.S. Espionage Act, on which the prosecution of Assange is based on, is again, does not allow, for example, a public interest defense, that, you're a whistleblower, you're a journalist. So this is, of course, it's a very dark day for journalism, a very dark day for the press anywhere in the world. It's a dark day for democracy that, again, the appeal will go on. It's pretty much expected that the British Supreme Court will, not, will decide with the appeals court on the new appeal, and the only hope Assange will have then is, but it is a possible hope, the European Court of Human Rights, because that court, unlike the British courts, clearly has a reputation for actually, defending essentially the rights of actual people rather than, the national security rights of governments. And again, as I said, they have a history of, ruling very strongly for press freedom. Britain, even though they've, of course, left the EU, through Brexit, they still accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights for, various treaties that they've signed. So, because again, in general, the last thing I'll say is, I've always thought that they don't actually if Assange was actually extradited to the U.S., it would be a huge egg on the face of the Biden, any U.S. government, who was in charge at the time, and Biden especially. I mean, the whole idea of the U.S. fighting for press freedom, or freedom at all, of jailing a journalist simply for exposing their war crimes, be expose the U.S. as, well, they already exposed as huge hypocrites, but it would up it. And so I think essentially they're hoping to keep Julian, again, with his appeals, in jail forever, and hope that basically he dies in jail. Something that could come soon, because one of the things that happened after his appeal was reversed so he could be extradited. He had a stroke a few days ago. So obviously his health is in serious jeopardy, and that's beyond, again, the correct assessment by a psychiatrist that he would probably commit suicide if he were to be extradited to the U.S. So, Ken, as someone involved in journalism, with tangentially, you got what are your thoughts?
I don't think he's had a fair representation to the public. I don't think the majority of the public know what he leaked. I think what
he's being charged on. Most Americans think he's been charged with, leaking the DNC stuff,
we don't know.
Yeah.
But I think, to me, the major
or he's
impact
responsible
was
for killing U.S. informants, which, again, the DOD did a huge study and had to admit in the Chelsea Manning case that nobody was killed as a result of the information given about Afghanistan and Iraq and all of that.
Right. But, I mean, to me, the most shocking thing was the fraudulent case that Sweden put up about the secretary that he had an affair with. Say, no. It's the second time he didn't ask me if he could, and
the woman didn't want to press charges.
It was ridiculous. Ridiculous,
He just they wanted him to take an AIDS test. So
this is like the worst cover-up I've ever seen.
Well, it was a show. It's been a show trial through.
Yeah, so
Stalin would be very happy with that.
He's got a flaw. He's got one flaw. I mean, I'm only talking about this with no experience. Snowden did it right. He had plans, or at least he was competent enough
to go to another country.
to get to a safe house in Russia. And Julian didn't have his. I think he.
Well, he was. I think sort of safe in the embassy.
No, that's bullshit.
Yeah, that was
in an embassy in another country. No.
Yeah. It's not.
No, he needs to go someplace.
Well, again, it was because they were bringing the Swedish case, and he knew, again, which people lied about at the time, that he wouldn't face extradition to the U.S. And now we know that there was a sealed indictment that they were hoping to get. So his only choice at that point, again, being in London, he couldn't get on a plane to another country.
I understand.
I had to go into the embassy then at that point.
It was a little short on the foresight, that's all. That's what I'm saying. Snowden got,
Right.
Although
obviously if Snowden is somewhat discredited by being in Russia, because everybody says, then now you must have given the Russians something and crap like that, which is complete nonsense. But
no. Yeah. So it's okay. It's not, it's I know a lot of people are hanging on it because you think of him as like the guy who hit a home run.
Towards fascism, would you say this puts us on again?
Oh, fascism? This is not that
or authoritarianism at the very least. I mean, doesn't it? I think it's, well, again, Jim's the journalist, but I'm of the belief that, like people like Roger Waters and Nils Melcher, who's been from the UN, been saying this could be the end.
I think there's been a lot of suppression in the removal of Chris Cuomo from the TV, from CNN, because he's a schmuck and an idiot and everything. But they took him off on like something that's, oh my God, he helped his brother. He didn't do anything illegal. He didn't even get accused of anything. And they just keep, he's off the air.
Right.
The socially correct police, like this is the 1400s, and you got to have a wig and follow etiquette and everything, and you can't say this and you can't say that. That's right in the face. He's just a populist idiot who does a TV show, and they took him off the air. Julian Assange is a serious threat.
Yeah.
So I can see with the government, well, I don't know. Does he still have information that they're concerned he would be leaking?
WikiLeaks, I mean, not himself personally. And, from stuff that there's a former U.S. Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, who she's talked about, she knows people who knows people. And she said basically, while he was in Belmarsh prison, he was, he was interrogated with chemicals, to talk. And that was part of, so they've gotten everything out of him, meaning the U.S. and U.K. governments that he, again, they basically have broken him in that sense. But, WikiLeaks still operates, so they may have something. And again, there was the whole thing, again, there's the dead man switch that I don't know if he dies or something, that essentially the entire file, the unredacted files of WikiLeaks would then be, dumped on the world, and with whatever consequences that would lead to.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
As a fail-safe, to don't go to that extreme, or if you don't want your entire secret.
I just think that each president since he's been, well, this all happened under Obama. So Obama and Trump and Biden missed an opportunity to pardon him, which would give them very strong position, very strong support, at least from the left.
Now we've seen other world leaders, including Putin and Xi, essentially point to Assange and say, you Americans don't really believe in press freedom. You're a bunch of hypocrites.
Yeah, that's just a long line.
Which is somewhat true. I mean,
well, she just has to go to the end of the line about criticizing the U.S. That's like, oh yeah, big deal, press freedom. We're not worried about that so much. There's a lot of other crimes. Press freedom.
Let's some other people.
Yeah, let's go.
Dennis and or Jim. Dennis, can you unmute? Let's give Dennis a chance first.
Oh yeah, well, okay. Go ahead.
But if Dennis. Dennis, can you unmute? Or Jim, while we're waiting? Oh, there you go, Dennis. Okay, yeah. Okay, so give us your thoughts on that. Yes, we can hear you, Dennis.
United States is just telling people that you dare challenge us or tell the truth about us, you're going to be punished. It's just terror that they're offering.
Right, and silence,
Right.
The message to every journalist, and I don't know why the Times and the rest of them aren't screaming about it, except I think they don't like that Julian Assange is a better journalist than all of them combined, which he has been over the last 10, 15 years. He's done more actual journalism than, in terms especially in national security, in terms of, all of them combined.
Well, the United States is telling the world that they're fascists. That's what they're doing.
Sure. Okay. I've heard other people say that too, but Jim, as the only credentialed journalist here, I'm sure you have some thoughts too.
Well, let Michael talk about this. Let Mike come in.
Mike, you want to unmute? Mike, are you there? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm here. My feeling is that. Well, first of all, if he's extradited to the United States, he has to be put on trial. Correct?
Yeah, but he'll be put on trial in the Eastern District of Virginia, or wherever it is. Basically, it's a court where all the jurors are, government contractors, spooks, and members of the military. It has something like a 98% conviction rate, especially again, and anything. Nobody gets off on a national security charge like this. So the fix would, the issue would be, would the Supreme Court then step in with the First Amendment issue? But again, that would take time. And again, Assange might be dead by the time they get around to actually repealing, through the Supreme Court would get around to saying the Espionage Act is unconstitutional, which it of course is. But what are your other thoughts?
fact is that we should be concerned about Assange's health and his well-being, personal well-being. I mean, he's and he's a human being and has value, intrinsic value in that. But on the other hand, the cause of what he's doing, if he's put on trial in the United States, and that trial isn't a closed trial, closed to the public, and even if it were, it would create an uproar in the United States.
It would be, because it would be a national security, it would be like any one of the whistleblower cases, John Curia, they're all closed. And often the defendant is not allowed to see the evidence against him. Only his lawyers.
Yeah, there would be, in other words, it would be still high profile. They can close they can close it up as much as they want, but it still would be high profile. Right now, he's not high profile in the United States because, of course, Americans are just worried about what's going on there.
Well, because the press is actively suppressing any knowledge of it and doesn't talk about it at all.
Right.
Even though they're on the chopping block too.
Well, not the press. The press plays a game. In other words, they don't want to alienate people, et cetera, et cetera. It's a back and forth. But there is at least the possibility or the hope that there could be something like the Hartford Courage used to be, which is that something that will go against the government tide.
I mean, in theory, there shouldn't be a case. Again, they violated his attorney-client privilege. They've tried to kill him. They've tortured him, essentially, with solitary confinement while he's in the UK. They've hurt they've damaged his physical health. I mean, he's a political prisoner. There are so many things, reasons why he shouldn't, be extradited. He shouldn't be. The charges against him are complete, bullshit.
Right, but what you're giving is your opinion. If it goes up to the Supreme Court, they're going to have to come up with something more evidentiary. But the fact is, still, once he comes back to the United States, he gains a higher profile, much higher profile than he has in recent years, in the past few years, in the United States.
Sure.
And one wonders if the Biden administration at this point would be willing to risk that kind of high profile.
Well, he's gonna face a huge backlash from Democrats who are again convinced, Assange works for Putin and stupid shit like that, from powerful people within the Democratic Party who Assange, of course, did expose with the DNC leaks, who his guts now. When they used to love him when he was exposing the bad stuff Bush did.
Within the Democratic Party that would push back against it. In other words, yes, it would be people in the Democratic Party itself, and obviously the Republicans who would say, throw him in jail and throw away the key. But there are enough people.
And I'll say that, Mike, because this is not something I'm just saying. Randy Credico he's been talking. He apparently talked to some people that he knows in Washington, in the Democratic Party, in the administration, and he was okay.
What I'm trying to say is that there would be people like Randy Credico, but there would be other people that would be pushing back on this.
We need a mobilization. People need to be in the streets.
I'm not saying that he won't be put away. He won't be put in jail. That this massive injustice that there won't be a massive injustice against him. However, for what he's fighting for, I'm not talking about him personally now.
Yeah.
But for the cause he's fighting for, it will ignite it. It could ignite it.
It could, sure, yeah. It should. I mean, if we care about democracy and free press, and all that stuff we're supposed to care about.
If that's the case, then in other words, especially since it seems to be almost a fait accompli that he's coming back here, at least right now, unless he pulls a rabbit out of a hat.
They're going to appeal. Again, it's going to go to the British Supreme Court, then to the European Court of Human Rights.
If he does indeed come back to the United States, then I don't think the cause itself I'm not saying it would be necessarily beneficial, but I don't think the cause is over.
No.
Tragedy for him.
Again, there would always be the hope that the Supreme Court would stand up in what's an obvious First Amendment.
I wouldn't count on anything about the Supreme Court, but the fact is that not this Supreme Court, but the fact is that one other corrective. What Assange is, I don't know. You're talking about that he puts other journalists to shame. No, he doesn't. He was a journalist. What he has become is, shall we say, and I say this in a positive sense, an enabler of journalists, like a good editor, like Bradley was.
Yeah,
he's a publisher. That's not necessarily. I mean, in other words, he's not a reporter. He's not an investigative journalist, but he is a publisher like some of the better publishers in the United States have been. So just a corrective when you talk about him as a journalist, but he's not acting as a journalist per se, but he is for journalism. Gesundheit, whoever sneezed. The idea is that, however, what I'm just trying to say is that this, what he's trying to represent, what he's representing, the cause of journalism or open journalism, the cause is not necessarily dead, and may well be ignited again if he indeed does come back to the United States.
Okay, yeah, I want to put in there. Michael is exactly correct. You could talk about principles and rights and wrongs. This is real politic. I don't think either the Republicans or the Democrats want the Assange case in the news. Who's going to put chips on the table with Assange walking in the room during the 2022 midterms? You're for Assange? You're against Assange? You want a trial? You want to pardon him? It's just too much. It's too much of a hot potato. And both of them would blame the other side. They do that all the time. COVID, it's Trump's fault. COVID, it's the Democrats. It's just another piece of crap they could throw around. So real politics, it would be to the benefit of I think the Democrats and the Republicans to have Britain do us a favor, stall for a while. Give him good care, take care of him, stop harassing him, but keep him there for a while. I don't think he's even been to the London Museum. Give him a tour of the city. He's still in London, right? So I think Mike is absolutely correct on that.
He's in a prison outside of London. That is
okay, right.
So that is called the British version of Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, fine. So you could say, well, come on, lighten up. Give him a birthday party, something, but keep him there. Don't let him come to the States. Keep him underneath your jurisdiction.
That might be what they want. They probably would prefer he die in jail, basically. That'll get him out of their hair.
I think, we had something like that recently. So I think Michael's exactly correct. Forget about what's right and wrong. Look at the practicalities.
Oh, sure. But okay. Jim is the last one. So.
All right. Well, I just want to bring up something that happened at Ellsberg. Ellsberg asserted about 10 years ago that there was actually a plot to kill him. That in May of '72, a bunch of Bay of Pigs veterans who were CIA assets had been brought up from Miami with orders to incapacitate me totally. All right. Now, I don't know if that's been proven or not, but, incapacitate, what the hell does that mean? I mean,
Not proven, no, that's just, yeah.
Correct. And then the other thing that was asserted by G. Gordon Liddy is that there was a plan to drop acid into Ellsberg soup at a DC fundraiser so he could basically be portrayed as a blithering idiot. So, that just gets into the Assange thing. Now, that's an interesting question that Ken raises. What are the politics of bringing him back? At this point, the legal stuff has been taking on a life of its own for several years. Now, Biden last week at the Summit for Democracy, he made a big deal about the free press, about how values unite us and all that stuff. And it's the bedrock of democracy. It's how people get informed. And of course, the question of Assange is that, frankly, he just should be let loose free, which Biden will not do, of course. politically. He will not do that because that would open him to all sorts of further drops in approval ratings. And most Americans, actually, when they're polled, favor extraditing Assange. They favor a trial. So I think it's erroneous to argue that there's not a lust to get this guy, because there is. Now, and if he is extradited here, he's going to be tried under the Espionage Act, which is different than going into other things. So they can essentially, they can, handle that as a very different kind of trial. Now, obviously, people are pointing out, like the director of Amnesty International, Agnes Calamari, basically says that no one responsible for alleged U.S. war crimes committed in the course of Afghanistan and Iraq wars has been held accountable, let alone prosecuted. And yet a publisher who exposes such crimes is potentially facing a lifetime in jail. He's facing 175 years in jail, so forget it, he's going to die in jail if they get him. And so that contradiction, I think, is something that the press is going to be put into an awkward position, because the press about a year ago was starting to defend Assange. They had reversed themselves. I've been to events where all the editors from The Guardian, from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, had all worked together to deal with the WikiLeaks information, and they all basically stressed what kind of a difficult SOB Assange was to work with. And I don't doubt he is. I sort of give him at face value, because the movie that was done on him as a kid, he's a little obnoxious twit in Australia. However, the value of the information was astounding. Astounding. People I knew who had top secret clearances used to come up to me and ask me as a favor to read the Assange material because they couldn't do it. And that was when they released literally 6 or 7 years of after-action reports from the Afghan war. It was quite amazing. I mean, no one really ever exploited that the way they should. I was at the time arguing for somebody, let's make this big database. And everybody was freaked out because they put the Mox Nix on anybody who had a classification, a top-secret classification or above, that person could not read the Assange Wikipedia material. It was considered a transgression of the Espionage Act. So it's going to be interesting to see how the press actually deals with this, because they were arguing for freedom of the speech, but then you're going to have the reality of him being tried. And you're right, Alex, if he's down there in the Eastern District, forget about it, he's screwed. So it's an interesting question. Maybe the Justice Department under Merrick Garland would probably think that, well, how they're going to operate on their own speed, but how Biden operates, I cannot see Biden granting him amnesty at all while he's being tried. Maybe he could grant him amnesty if he's a lame duck president and loses to Trump. That'd be sort of a big fuck you to Trump. But who knows what's going to happen? It's a very tough case, and obviously it'd be best to release him, but I don't see how that's going to happen given the circumstances of domestic American politics. I just can't see that happening. Now, before we move on, you're listening to Going Viral, GoingViral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman, and we were talking about the whole question of Julian Assange, which is a fascinating case. And we are going to now just switch a little bit to some other domestic news, or actually international news. Let's just talk quickly about Russia and China. I'm going to put this piece up. This is a piece that occurred today. This is the virtual powwow that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin held talks on. That was advertised in the media. This is them saying hello virtually and talking about how great it is to be allied with each other against American hegemony.
The presidents of China and Russia, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, spoke for more than an hour on Wednesday, hailing their close ties.
The world has undergone unprecedented changes and a pandemic in the last century. Sino-Russian relations have withstood the test of various storms.
Deep historical traditions of friendship and mutual understanding have allowed us to take our relations to the next breakthrough level.
Trade between China and Russia exceeded $115 billion this year, a new high. The leaders pledged to increase cooperation on energy. Beijing already relies on Moscow for much of its minerals, oil, and natural gas. Plans are underway for nuclear power stations. They're also coordinating on efforts to further space exploration and scientific innovation. Chinese analysts say the relationship is now stronger than it's ever been.
The two countries support each other in their core interests. For example, when it comes to China's core interests, those are territorial integrity and sovereignty, development and security.
The meeting comes as both nations face mounting criticism for their policies at home and abroad. Russia for a mass buildup of troops on its border with Ukraine, and China for increasing military activity near Taiwan, a self-ruled island Beijing claims as its own.
Common interests as well as common grievances have brought China and Russia closer together. Both face rising tensions with the US and its allies, as well as accusations of human rights abuses, and both have been actively supporting each other on the international stage.
Officials in Washington have underscored a growing military threat from both Russia and China. Putin and Xi say they'll work more closely when it comes to security. They have conducted several joint exercises this year. Moscow provides Beijing with advanced weaponry, including fighter jets and missile defense systems.
The US is now completely focused on great power competition after they left Afghanistan. So there's a short window of opportunity, I think, that both Moscow and Beijing see before the US military kind of gears up for this great power competition, and they are trying to exploit that.
The leaders are known to share a good personal bond. Several countries have declared diplomatic boycotts of Beijing's 2022 Winter Olympics, but Vladimir Putin has confirmed his attendance, the only major leader to do so far. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
All right. Now, there's an interesting relationship. If we're talking about the internationalization of conflict, this was sort of fascinating today to hear. Now, let me just set this up a little bit. This is France 24 talking about the withdrawal of French troops from Mali. And what is fascinating about this is that this is now, Macron is planning to go to Mali, and what is happening is that the government in Mali, which is a dictatorship, all right, a coup d'etat came into power in Mali in the midst of them fighting against the jihadists. This has been going on now for almost 10 years. And the Russian Wagner Group, because, and remember, the Wagner Group is a paramilitary, it's sort of like the Blackwell of a PMC.
Blackwater, you mean? Yeah,
Blackwater, yeah, Blackwater.
Private military contractor.
Right, a PMC, a private military contractor, sort of, and this particular guy who runs it is close to Putin. They've been involved in fighting in Libya, all throughout the Middle East, and in Africa. So they are now threatening to hire the Wagner Group to come in and replace the French. And the French, of course, are backing the EU and NATO countries that are opposing the Russians with their deployment of troops, essentially in a rather hostile mode in the Ukraine. So this is sort of fascinating. I'll play a little bit about this. This is them talking about the situation in Mali in Africa.
There's chaos in Afghanistan still high on the minds. Here's the question. When's the right time to end a military intervention? What happens after you go? 9 years after Timbuktu welcomed them as heroes and liberators, the final French troops completing their pullout from their last outpost in Mali's far north on Tuesday. No unruliness here, but also no cries of mission accomplished. The jihadist radicals that scattered when French-led forces intervened in 2013 have long since morphed into a low-intensity, hard-to-stop insurgency with raids as far away as the far north of Benin. The French drawing down, but they're not gone yet, redeploying to the city of Gao to help coordinate with UN Blue Helmets, African peacekeepers, and a Malian army that critics say, after 9 years of support and training, has proved better at staging coups than winning hearts and minds. With civilians scared and frustrated, anti-French sentiment on the rise. What to make of persistent overtures by Bamako to Moscow and the Russian mercenaries of Wagner? What to make of fresh EU sanctions against Wagner and France's warning it would review all options if the junta cozies up further to a private army accused of abuses in another former French colony, the Central African Republic? More broadly, what's Emmanuel Macron thinking ahead of a visit next Monday to Mali that happens at the outset of his re-election bid? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about France's departure from Timbuktu, and joining us by the banks of the Niger River from the capital, Bamako, France 24 senior correspondent Cyril Payen. Good evening, Cyril.
Good evening.
Also with us, risk and policy consultant Nyagare Bagayoko of the African Security Sector Network. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
From Oxford University in England, Samuel Romani, author of Russia in Africa, Resurgent Great Power or Bellicose Pretender. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And from Washington, Michael Shurkin, analyst for risk consultants 14 North Strategies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. Yeah, this was the third and final of France's outposts in the far north that's lowered the flag now. Laurent Berstecker has more on that departure from Timbuktu.
Making their final preparations before leaving northern Mali for good. French Barkhane soldiers were getting ready to transfer this military base in Timbuktu, their last one in the country's north, to the Malian army.
Aujourd'hui, la force transfère le camp de Tombouctou aux forces armées maliennes.
Les populations sahéliennes, elles sont probablement un petit peu en manque d'informations. Donc c'est aussi à nous d'expliquer. Je pense qu'elles sont vécues comme un changement. Je ne suis pas sûr que ça soit l'armée française et les contributeurs européens à l'opération Takuba, qui est une composante de l'opération Barkhane, vont continuer d'agir à partir des bases, notamment de Gao à Niamey.
The departure of French troops has left local populations divided. In Timbuktu, where armed groups continue to regularly carry out attacks, many fear this will lead to a security vacuum and further fuel the spiral of violence.
I worry when things will happen. I'm really worried. Let's see what happens.
Jim, you're going to talk, bring it to a stop.
And while others seemed to
Ken, maybe you want to read
or
it?
kill the mute were willing to do so on record.
I'm not muting it.
In the village of Tassakan, at the heart of the Timbuktu region, residents have been left to fend for themselves for years. Feel they've been completely abandoned by the state.
Here there's no social media, nothing. We don't know what consequences their departure will have. We're really worried. What we want is peace, because without peace there's nothing.
Barkhane's departure means guaranteeing population safety in the north is now a priority for Malian authorities. A daunting task in a country where armed groups control nearly 2/3 of the entire territory.
So, Cyril Payen, in that report we see...
All right, so that was a report, and it's a great discussion they have. This is on France 24 today, talking about this. But I wanted to just show this because of the interrelationship between, the sort of levels of tension we see manifesting itself globally between Russia, China, and the United States, and sort of this spills over into these kind of situations in Africa, which are all localized. All these conflicts are quite localized, but the jihadi movements inside that area have penetrated into Niger, and they're working with the splits in Boko Haram. So we're talking about a fascinating situation developing, and the French have admitted defeat. If someone tunes into that, the discussion concerns and revolves around the fact that it sort of reminds you of the Americans saying they won a victory in Iraq and withdrawing, and in Afghanistan that they won a victory and pulling out their troops, whereas we know, of course, the situation is much more complicated than that.
And Jim, I found an article at South Front that has some additional things to say of what they think.
All right, throw it up.
Okay, not too long. So, they note that they had kind of talked about this back in June. We'll plan to withdraw to give up this base of theirs. What interesting is, again, Macron's been very critical of the the coup leader in Mali. Again, of course, we are talking to the Russians. Of course, the French regard the Western Africa, Francophone Africa, as like their sphere of influence, essentially. They don't take kindly to anybody kind of butting into what they think of as really their sphere of influence, essentially. But also note here that, they are welcome at the beginning by the Malians. But, again, they haven't won, and the security situation is not good. But, they may be back. And also that there's, to note here again, there's a European, multilateral mission, note again, all these different countries that helped in the military mission in Mali. And also, again, here, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad, the G5 Sahel, acting together, in this conflict. So, again, and also the reasons, it's controlling migration, but also, illicit trafficking, so drugs and people, and of course, fighting against radical Islam. So, but again, we'll see what happens if the Russians do and Wagner do show up.
Well, the Russians, what Macron has said is that if the Mali government cooperates with the Wagner group, they will withdraw support from the Mali government. So it's a really interesting situation. And where they've deployed their troops is they move them further south so they actually can get involved in the fighting against the jihadists that are aligning themselves with Boko Haram in Niger. And in Niger, of course, Boko Haram operates. Niger is at the northeastern border of Nigeria. And Mali actually spills over. So it's a really interesting situation developing. Now, Alex, what other stories do you have to share with us here?
Okay. Well, I have a few. Let me start with this one on Omicron, again, spreading, they're saying literally by Deutsche Welle, literally like wildfire in the UK. So maybe a bit of bad karma for the Assange decision. But, more likely, of course, it's a result of Boris Johnson's completely idiotic COVID policies from the very beginning of set things up for this. But it's getting really bad there, essentially, in terms of the spread. So let's listen to this.
Begin tonight with the Omicron variant of the coronavirus spreading like wildfire in the UK. Today, the UK recorded its highest ever daily number of coronavirus cases, more than 78,000 this Wednesday. Now, that's about 10,000 more than the previous record high set back in January, with the highly transmissible Omicron variant fueling this latest surge. A senior British health official calling Omicron, quote, probably the most significant threat since the start of this pandemic. This week, UK lawmakers voted to toughen coronavirus measures, including introducing COVID-19 passes to enter large venues. Today, Prime Minister Boris Johnson defended his handling of the pandemic.
Since Friday, when I decided that we had to accelerate the booster program in view of the data about Omicron, we've cut the timetable in half, Mr. Speaker. Monday was the biggest vaccination Monday in the history of this country, and yesterday was the second biggest vaccination achievement by the NHS ever. More than 500,000 jabs delivered, and the campaign continues to grow. I want to thank absolutely everybody involved. I want to thank all the British public for coming forward to get boosted now.
Well, earlier I spoke to Christina Pagel. She is a professor at the University College London, and she works on COVID-19 data. It's good to have you on the program. We've heard today that this new variant, Omicron, is probably the biggest threat in this pandemic. What does that mean? I mean, what scenario are you expecting to see in the next coming weeks?
I mean, the problem with this variant is that, the first time we ever heard of it was only 3 weeks ago. And it's now 60% of cases in London and likely to be dominant in England within a few days. And wherever it's being tracked across the world, it is spreading, doubling every 2 days. We've never really seen spread that fast. That's the danger, is that every 2 days, the problem gets twice as bad. Every week, it gets, more than 8 times as bad. So you don't have any time to wait and see. So that's why it's threatening. It can affect a hell of a lot of people in a very short amount of time. And if even a really tiny percentage of them need hospital, you can still overwhelm health services.
Yeah, you can overwhelm the health services, but I mean, what about the severity of COVID-19 with this new variant? I mean, are people getting sicker because of this variant?
So we're almost certain that they're not getting sicker because of it. If anything, the indications from South Africa are that it's a bit less severe. But don't forget, some of that just comes because we have more immunity from previous vaccination and previous infection. However, it's certainly not the case that it protects you completely. And we do have people with Omicron in hospital now in the UK, and Denmark is also seeing hospitalization of their Omicron cases, and at about the same rate as Delta. So it's not the case that this is completely mild.
And yet we had some British lawmakers voting against the government when it brought in these new coronavirus restrictions yesterday. I mean, do you think these new measures, and do you think getting everyone boosted, is this going to be enough?
So I don't think the new measures are going to be enough. I think boosting people is incredibly important because we do know that the booster is effective against this variant, even if it's not quite as good as it would have been against Delta. But it just takes quite a long time. You know, you have to boost everyone who's eligible. We're only, half of the way through that. And then it takes another week or two for the booster to have effect. The problem with Omicron rising in the UK is it's happening right now. So we need more measures right now to stop transmission while we boost people.
So what should the government be doing now?
I think we need drastic measures. At the moment, we heard today it's doubling less than every 2 days. That means by Christmas, which is in 10 days, it will be 30 times worse than we have now. So I would suggest that you have a very short circuit breaker up until Christmas, and then allow people to mix over Christmas and reevaluate where you are then. We'll have a lot more information by then, but we just need to stop transmission now. It's just going like wildfire.
Okay, Christina Pago with University College London. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Well, I think it means, Alex, that guys like Ken should be dragged out and given another booster shot.
Right.
Maybe 2. Forget about 3. He needs another 2.
Right.
Drag him out.
Interesting people who voted against Jeremy Corbyn, a bunch of other. They particularly voted that there's a part of they passed a law, to fire healthcare workers who don't get vaccinated, and for workers' rights, Corbyn and a bunch of other left-wing Labour Party members, plus essentially every other. The only ones who voted for these measures were members of most of Labour and most of the Conservative Party. Although in their case, again, more than 100 conservatives actually voted against Boris Johnson with these kind of mandates that, again, including one to fire healthcare NHS workers who don't get vaccinated. So yeah,
right. We've talked about this a million times.
Yeah. Mike has.
Well, maybe Mike wants to talk about it the 1 millionth.
Or what, Mike? What are you hearing in Canada since they got Omicron too, right?
Canada is a little bit more careful than we are. And by the way, I want to come to the defense of Ken, and I'm defending.
I don't know. He's got to be dragged out. He's got to be dragged out.
I'm defending Ken primarily, or absolutely, for one major reason, and that is because he actually said I was absolutely right a few minutes ago. So I feel I owe him. Okay.
All right.
As for the Omicron variant, I don't want to say I told you so, but about 3 weeks ago, I was telling people that, maybe not you guys, but I was telling people, I said, when this thing hits the U.S., it's going to go through, especially in winter, it's going to go through us like.
It's going to spread like gangbusters.
Sure enough, it is, and we're hitting winter. The only upside of it is, if it is indeed, when the jury come out on it, less virulent, not as virulent
as Delta, but less virulent, yes, it will be something that will be a positive thing, except for the fact that, in other words, the more people you get infected, then the numbers of people going into the hospital, while it might be a much lower percentage, will still be just as high. I also have to say that today, this whole COVID thing, what people don't seem to realize, especially in this country, I mean, most people, is that you don't have much time with these things. Once they get here, again, they spread like wildfire. So the fact is, and today I was on the subway, and there was a guy, he was a homeless guy, he was coming around, shouting, saying, please help me. Hey, look, he's homeless, but no mask or anything like that. There was another guy came on playing music and shouting and saying, hey, you people are moving away from me. That's rude. That's rude.
They should have kissed you, Michael. They should have kissed you.
If it was someone who looked like Natalie Wood, yeah, maybe. But but the fact is, no, but this guy was doing it and people were telling him, put your fucking mask on. We won't move away. It's not because of your music. But the point is, the thing about viruses like this and contagion like this is, you don't need a majority or a substantial minority of people to actually wreak havoc. One person out of 10, sometimes one person out of 20 or 30, who's just a moron or just couldn't care less, can wind up wreaking havoc with this.
No shit. Wow.
Unless people, again, I have to say this, mask up, double mask, get their vaccinations, etc. That'll mitigate it at least a lot. But again, this is America, so don't count on it.
All right. So, Ken.
Yeah, I'm putting up these.
What do you
assume you could see these maps, right? You could see these statistics. Canada's got an increase in cases and deaths. Deaths are coming down. The vaccines, they're kind of weak here. 200,000. How many people live up there, Michael?
What is it, 20 million, Mike?
20 million.
Any graph that says there's only 200,000 vaccinated people in Canada is seriously...
No, those are...
Per day.
Yeah.
The total is 60,000.
60,000?
60 million, cumulative.
60 million, excuse me.
Yeah, there's 33 or 37 million people in
Well,
Canada.
that's doses, obviously. So
yeah, these are doses, so they're well vaccinated.
30 million people double vaxxed.
But they're still getting cases.
Doses. Mike, I assume they're giving third doses there too, right?
And getting that, and now we go back to the U.S.
Well, the third dose, they say, with quotes around it, say that it's the third, in other words, the efficacy is lower, even with two doses. It's the booster shot that gets it back closer to its original efficacy of the vaccine. For how long, we don't know. And we're probably going to have to get another shot that's Omicron specific,
that's US.
Probably in the spring. So guys, don't throw away your
well, only like China doesn't have to worry about this. They crushed it.
No, China, believe me, we don't know what's going on in China, Alex. For all we know, it could
something like Omicron, you would, the way it spreads, I think we would know if it was.
And whatever it is, it'll
you won't be able to hide it. Yeah.
Believe me, these are viruses. They don't go by which government. They don't pick a government or a governmental.
No, but
no deaths. No deaths.
China's been successful in dealing with it.
My opinion is they're saying no reported deaths reported by the government. I don't trust China. I know you don't trust the United States. I don't trust either of them, actually, but I certainly don't trust the information it's putting out, particularly with the virus. That's all.
All right, thank you.
Well, I can understand. There's not that... New York is not a really friendly place for going outdoors anyhow. Michael, why don't you try walking? Why don't you walk wherever you're going to go?
Ken, I don't want to give you a geography lesson, but to it's not always a good idea to walk from the one end of Queens to the bottom of Manhattan.
Okay. Excuse me.
Size matters. Yeah.
I got it. I know what you could do. If you get in the first car, because I used to do this as a kid. If you get in the first car at the subway and just plant yourself on the window, watch the tracks. Nobody can get in front of you. You know, you won't be contaminated. Just put yourself against the window, looking
if I
out
break
at
the
tracks.
window, and let the air come in and rush past me, that might be a good idea.
No, don't break the window. Just stand there and look out. I don't know. Maybe now you don't get as good a view. But or put a bag over your head, when you go in the subway, that kind of a thing. My son actually, I know somebody who bought a gas mask when this was first coming out, over from Amazon, a full like World War II thing, like it makes you look like an ant. So some people, you got to do what you got to do.
So to give the relative numbers, though, I'm looking at worldometers now. 1.2 million Britons are active cases now, and 10.1 million Americans.
Yeah.
So
we beat them.
Well, actually, Omicron is supposedly 3%.
All right.
Yeah, 3% of the cases is Omicron. Right.
All right, go on, Alex. What else you got?
Okay.
Give us something new.
Let's go back to Africa for another conflict piece. Let me put it. It's something that's going on in Cameroon, not too far from Mali. So in this case, there's also a connection here with climate change, as you'll see, because that's what they're fighting over water.
This is what's left of a once thriving market in the far northern region of Cameroon. It was burned down in fighting about access to water in the region. This mobile phone footage shows armed herders in Kusieri looking for water points to feed their cattle, fighting with fishermen and farmers unwilling to share their wells. 4 months after the end of a rainy season that brought little rainfall, people are willing to kill for a drop of water. This vendor says this is a war fueled by lack of water spilling across the region, the government standing by doing little to stop the fighting. At the local hospital, injured rival herders and farmers get treatment side by side after days of violence. The situation is tense. The governor offers envelopes of cash, but for many, this is not enough.
Overall, the situation has become calm again. Shops have been gradually reopening since yesterday, and so far we have not recorded any hotbed of tension. We will continue to receive communities, associations, and all those who want to make a contribution to the restoration of peace.
While Cameroon's president sends his ministers to the region to mediate, more than 30,000 people have fled to neighboring Chad, where President Mohamed Idris Deby is calling for urgent humanitarian assistance. The displaced left behind their homes and belongings, but brought with them tales of horror.
I was tortured by 7 people from the Arab community. I was seriously wounded on my back by machetes and almost died in the bush. Fortunately, my relatives found me and helped me to cross the river so I could be treated here. The conflict there has become very violent. I don't want to go back.
Not enough water and thirsty for revenge. This is a conflict made worse by a changing climate. With months to go before next year's rainy season, the people of Cameroon's far north fear the fight for water has only just begun.
So people, of course, have been talking about how water is the next thing we're going to have wars about, and so this is another sign that that's going to be the case. Of course, again, climate refugees will also be a result of this. And I should mention again, very good the historian of imperialism in the U.S. foreign policy, Alfred McCoy, has just come out with a very good book that argues that the U.S. is going to lose its hegemonic position by 2030 because of climate change. Because, we're going to be spending all our time basically dealing with climate climate change results, including, again, millions of climate refugees are going to be showing up on our borders. So the U.S. military is going to be spending all its time, and the Chinese, everybody's military, is spending all their times, again, dealing with climate catastrophe.
Well, I want to show something about northern Cameroon, and also, yeah, the military has been talking about this for quite a long time. This whole problem of the let's see, where is this? Oh yeah, here we go. All right, so this is let me see if I can get this more localized here. No, that's not doing it. What else will have to do? All right, I don't know if this can get blown up.
Can you zoom in? Okay.
I'm trying to see if I can. Okay.
There you go.
Now, what this shows is the ethnic diversity of northern Cameroon. These are different. This is different language speakers. This is Chad over here. This is Lake Chad up here up in the north, and this is. Let's see if I can blow this up. Okay, there we go. So what you'll see is these are different ethnic groups. Linguistic languages. So up here, there's a big ecological crisis going on in Lake Chad, which is affecting, and this is the area along this part of the border with Cameroon that Boko Haram is still relatively strong. The split from Boko Haram is off the map here. That's where the Islamic State of West Africa, the ISWP, that's the split of Boko Haram. They're operating around this area here. But if you go along the borders here, some of these areas are Kanuri speakers, and Kanuri is the dominant language, the linguistic language in northeastern Borno province here in Nigeria. So what you'll see here are basically totally different languages being spoken by the people here, because remember, the lingua franca of Cameroon is French. So these are people speaking different dialects, and you can see it's pretty diverse in terms of the languages they speak. And then again, you're going along these areas here, Borno State, and further down here. These are all areas that or this area in particular is very much a source of big conflict. And this issue of the fighting between the herders and the farmers, this is Cameroon, but this extends out into Nigeria. So if I was looking at a map of Nigeria, as you see the arrow going out here, we're talking about these fights about water between farmers and herders go on all through the middle part of Nigeria. So it's a really fascinating and diverse kind of situation going on there. But Dennis, your comments about all this, we haven't heard from you in a while. Dennis, jump in here.
Unmute, Dennis. You there, Dennis?
All right, well, Dennis will join us in a second. Let me finally, before I wanted to play this piece about, we were talking about what will happen with, the midterms. And this is sort of interesting because this is, if it's coming in here, I don't know where the hell it's coming in here. But this is a piece okay, here we go. This is a piece by CNN. If I can get this up here to be sized. This is a piece by CNN that talks about the situation in, well, I can't particularly get it on the screen here. Oh, here we go. All right, let me see. But the situation with Biden in terms of the election, and for some reason, I'm not able to see it. So why don't you switch off there, Alex or Kenny, and you throw in something you wanted to talk about.
Let's see.
Okay. Well, let me see if I'm on here. Oops. Okay, I'm talking, so I'll throw something up. Yeah, this is kind of relevant to immigration, which is what we were just talking about a little bit. This should be up somewhere. 1 second. Let's see where it would be. Maybe in here. Nope. You got something, Alex? I'm having trouble getting my thing up here. I'm having
I guess
pictorial dysfunction, internet
I
dysfunction.
have something related to what Jim was again. Well,
Go ahead.
the news today on that Biden's Build Back Better bill may be dead on arrival. In which case, it may his presidency may already be over.
About that, we talked about that before you came on, Alex.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah, so,
all right. So no, I have. Let's do this thing about Haiti then. That was interesting. Yeah, which is a tanker truck explosion. It killed a bunch of people. 50 or 60, I think. So this is pretty serious. And of course, again, another sign of how bad things are in Haiti.
One by one, victims of Monday's gas.
You're not sharing it on the screen.
Oh, dang it. Let me get to that. All right.
One by one, victims of Monday's gas explosion are loaded onto trucks as onlookers watch in shock. There's little comfort for this mother who weeps at the loss of her child. Wide sheets cover the victims as they lay sprawled across the street. Some too badly burned to be identified.
Well, I heard a loud noise around midnight. I asked one of my boys, "What is it about?" He said it was a large truck filled with gasoline. Right away, I left the place with my family and went the other way to the bridge. That's all I can say.
A truck carrying gasoline overturned Monday, exploding into a fireball and engulfing cars and homes in its path. Pedestrians reportedly rushed to the scene, collecting spilled gas as the country suffers from a severe fuel shortage.
I received many calls informing me about the fire and immediately sent the firefighters and police an alert so they could intervene. Unfortunately, many people died. But I want to congratulate our first responders because they put their lives at risk to control the fire and prevent any further deaths.
On Monday, Prime Minister Ariel Henry expressed his condolences, declaring 3 days of national mourning. With the local hospitals stretched thin, he has deployed field hospitals to the area. It is the latest tragedy in a country that has already experienced so much this year. Julian Wolf, Al Jazeera.
Well, that's pretty crazy that things are so bad with the fuel situation there. I mean, it was like a roaring fire. And obviously, the threat to people are rushing to the scene to basically, I guess get whatever gas was spilled on the ground because they're so desperate for gasoline for their generators and cars and so on. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Okay. Could we go back and talk about the water shortage in Cameroon? Is that what we're talking about, Jim?
Yeah. And,
okay. So look at that. Forget about the words that were up on the screen or what anybody said. What did you see? You see people living in the desert with little huts and sitting on blankets. There's nothing. There's nothing. You can barely see the horizon. It's so far away. I don't see even any trees. I don't see any animals.
Right. Well, no. Again, remember Jim probably knows more than about this, but the Sahara Desert's been expanding for decades, right, Jim?
Well, that's the Sahara Desert is north of there, but that's what they call the savanna region of Africa. That spread is a belt across those countries. It's essentially like Arizona, if you will, something like perhaps a little better. But around Lake Chad has been affected by global warming. It's actually reduced its levels. There's a big conflict at Lake Chad over access to fish. So the water issue is a very serious issue, and as Alex alluded to, the Pentagon has been on top of this issue for quite a long time, and they view the fact that we're going to have basically, no one in the Pentagon is acts idiotically about the fact that people are coming in from Central America due to the collapse of their economies. So anyway, but yes, it is indeed a situation of water shortages in those areas that you're
and also there are areas where there's been constant fighting going on since 2009 with Boko Haram.
Okay, so right, so there are multiple reasons to create migration emergencies, which is drought, starvation, medical, or pandemics,
Political problem.
guerrilla fighting, political problems, religious oppression.
Your philosophy is let them starve and die, right? Isn't it?
No, it's like if you don't want to take. Well, the point is this: if you go to the supermarket and buy 5 cartons of milk, yeah, I hope you got room in the refrigerator. If you got a refrigerator, you can only put 2 cartons in. Don't buy 5. Somebody's got to, or world leaders have to take responsibility for controlling population growth. By 2200 or something like that, the whole world will be split between Africa and Asia. It'll be like 3 billion people in Africa, 3 billion people in Asia, and the rest of the world will be about 1 billion people. That's the prognosis. And what are you going to do with these people? Is the answer to bring everybody here to New Jersey? Okay, I'm all right with that. Put them in New Jersey or Connecticut or Long Island. That's
what about
okay.
California?
That's fine. No, California's dangerous. California's going to break off and fall into the Pacific Ocean. I don't want to. That'd be evil to bring them here.
You guys are going to run out of water first, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. So put them in New Jersey.
All right.
So what do you want to do about that?
Well,
that's the point. You've got to take a look at the source of the problem.
But Dennis, why don't you unmute here and get into this conversation here? By the way, this is just to show you. This is a more. You unfortunately can't make it out, but this shows the actual. As you can see, these different shaded areas. These are
all these little tribes.
Well, no, they're linguistic groups, and here's the Kanuri. So this is Cameroon, right? Mm-hmm. You can see that there are all these different linguistic groups. Unfortunately, it's blurred because the DPI.
Doesn't that make them separate tribes? They're tribal.
Well,
they're languages, Ken. It's not necessarily tribes.
Yes, there is a tribal thing, but you can see. Look at the diversity of languages all along this area, which that piece that Alex was talking about. That's the only point I was making here. But the question of the that was it's too bad I don't the thing I listened to earlier today on China and the whole global climate change issue isn't available yet, because we'll do that next week. But one of the points they made is that one of the big issues that's not being grappled with is that look, the U.S. is the big leader in terms of climate change pollution. I mean, we are still ahead. I think China's a close second to us. But we're a major polluter. And when they look about how many tons, I think it was something like a ratio of 17 to 10. Every American will basically consume or pollute that much more than an average Chinese person. And the issue they were talking about is like, well, what does it really mean? That's why I put that piece up in the beginning. This is demystifying this. How many Americans are going to want to live in a situation where they're basically adopting the values of the hippie commune? All right. I mean that's it's really as simple as that. And that unfortunately, and the more radical groups that talk about global climate change that have socialist and communist attitudes about them and anarchist attitudes, that's where their direction is thrust. That the West has to basically devolve its power and share it with the rest of humanity.
And China and the East too, right? Not just the West.
Well, all the countries around the world.
Moscow.
All of them. And I mean, humanity just has to get its act together as humanity. I just think, why do you think I like Star Trek?
Yeah, but okay, so that's a utopia. When did that ever exist? Besides Alexander and Alexander the Great. When did you ever have a uniformity over a large area?
Before I bring Dennis in on this one, Alexander was. You read Aristotle, who was his big advisor. That is the kind of that's Greek. Alex knows this as well as I did. Hellenistic imperialism, pure.
And you want uniformity. You want one world. You want one world. Don't you want one world?
Megalomaniac, you know, up
Aren't you
there
talking
with
about one
Saddam.
world? You say the world's got to come together and take care of each other.
Conquest.
One world.
Bloody conquest. But Dennis, your comments about all this. Dennis.
One world.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you, Dennis.
I'm going to mute everybody else.
We obviously need peace.
Okay.
And because the military and war are the most polluting and causing of climate change. And the problem is the United States is, along with, I guess, Britain and France and the other former colonial powers, they don't want peace. They want these countries to be under their thumb. And there's a real problem there. It's a control issue. It's people. The United States is really bad at all this. We're the number one polluter in the world. Oh no, maybe the Chinese might be, but we're at least number two. We're a bad polluter, and the only way that we're going to solve our problems is if the populace becomes rebellious instead of going along with what's happening. And we need a mass revolutionary party, and we have to get serious about change. And we're not serious about change. Most people are very individualistic, and they're cynical, and it's a very bad situation. It's like where people are coming from. It's the end of the human race, basically, unless something changes radically.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw it, but the Times had a really good piece today online. You know, it's into one of their interactive things about currents and melting seas around Antarctica and all this, interesting science. Let me put it up. It's it's quite interesting. So I'll full screen it.
Yeah, Jim mentioned it yesterday but I couldn't find it. Put it up.
Oh, wait. My computer's okay. So there we go.
The world is melting. Go ahead.
So you'll see again. It's one of those things where, like, as you scroll through it, it'll. So
let's see.
Okay. So here. Wait. Oh, I think of this. So wait. Jeez. Oh. Now it's stuck on me. Wait. Oh boy. I think I might have crashed. Wait. Oh, there we go. It's just all right, here we go. So it's now it goes okay. So now let's go back to the beginning on this one. So now it's stuck now.
Alex, you've already seen it. Why don't you just narrate it?
Why
Tell us what
Here we go. Well, again, it's about all these how the currents are accelerating the melting of the sea, the ice seas on Antarctica. They're essentially it's as the water melts, it undermines kind of the foundations for the glaciers. So they begin to melt more, to fall into the ocean more quickly. Also, there's a bunch of carbon dioxide trapped in the ice and in the water that starts to circulate faster and comes out. So it all accelerates climate change, essentially.
Now,
Yes,
in actuality, Alex, what's happening is there's an ice shelf blocking a major glacier. And when that ice shelf breaks apart, then the glacier will basically melt into the sea. And that does have to do with the ocean water warming up. It's also happening in the Arctic.
We went through this at great length yesterday, Alex, and I should say that I attended a conference about maybe 2007, 2008. I was the only civilian at this conference. It was a global climate change conference held out at Lamont Doherty, which is a national NOAA. It's basically one of the designated research centers for the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Agency of the federal government. And they had about 150 climate scientists from around the world there. And it took me about 2 days to understand the gobbledygook that they talk. I must have taken about, I'd say 70 pages of notes because I was trying to understand all their jargon. You know, it's like I don't normally go and listen to geologists and people like that talk. But what particularly stuck out in my mind was exactly what's discussed in these reports about the Thwaites Glacier down in Antarctica and what they're talking about up in the Arctic Circle. And that is that the circulation of the sea, the lower you are in terms of the level, the warmer it is. So there's all this warm water was essentially coming up beneath Antarctica and melting it, which was sort of like I said, wait, wow, it's way, way down there. And there's streams of warm water due to global warming that circulate. I mean, it was a revelation to me. I'd never heard this stuff. So this whole thing has been, gone on. Scientists have verified this. And again, the industries, those in charge of, fossil fuel companies, etc., they deserve all the opprobrium they get. And I always like it when I see Greta Thunberg and all the rest of them thumb their noses at those bastards because they deserve everything they get on that issue. Now, there is an issue that I wanted to raise that hopefully my New York Times won't crap out. And there it is. Now, this is sort of on the question. This is Etzel today talking about a breaking point. And so all these different political scientists who normally are, they can be very uncommitted about these things. They're talking about a whole series of essays, 8 essays that were put in the National Academy of Sciences, and all they're considering is the fact that we might be at a point where the polarized American electoral system with, quote, traditional democratic norms is so to the point where it can break. And so what Etzel talks about in this article is a whole series of academic studies, which he cites here, polarization and tipping points, inter-individual cooperation mediated by partisanship, and what he's referring to in the Madison Cure for Mistress of Faction. He's talking about what Madison would actually talk about in the Federalist Papers, about Federalist 10, about how you could actually, in a pluralistic republic, mitigate the problems of factions. Well, this article argues that ain't going to happen. We're way past that. And here you see the piece that Martin Gellman wrote, former New York Times reporter, Pulitzer Prize winner in the Atlantic. Trump's new coup has already begun. George Packer, also writing Atlantic, Are We Doomed? Et cetera, et cetera. So, and this is sort of along the lines of what we've been talking about. And unless the threat of democracy posed by a military coup, the threat posed by authoritarian populism is incremental. And so that's the kind of situation we're in right now. And we can use the term fascism if you want, etc. But this is a situation that's pre-fascist. And if we're talking about mass movements, Dennis, I would argue that we already are seeing. We're living through a period of mass movements. The 80 million Americans who are associated with Trump, that's a mass movement. That's a mass movement. And they are certainly morphing themselves. And now we see that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, all these groups, have decentralized. They now are working and running for local office politically around the United States. So I think the mass movements are there. It just is that a mass movement along the lines you're talking about, Dennis, the left has not formed yet. And at this point, I tend to doubt that they will. But hopefully I can be proven wrong, because people will react to this and fight it. Anyway, Dennis, you got some more pieces? You want to do some technology stuff,
No,
right?
I just want to say that we should get Steve Jonas on here to talk about the encroaching fascism.
No,
That's a real danger.
Steve was sick, unfortunately. He had to bow out today. He was sick. But Kenny, you got another piece that you want to throw up?
But Dennis, I thought you would want to talk about the Kashama Sawant, since she's held off the recall. Or did you do something about that yesterday?
Who?
Socialist city council member in Seattle who keep doing recall campaigns against her, because she actually does a lot of good. She's responsible for them raising their minimum wage and a bunch of other reforms. But they just had her latest recall election. She's going to win by just a few hundred votes. But she's got essentially the entire establishment and Amazon and Microsoft all funding the campaign against her. But she survived it. So
Well, you look at this strike at Columbia University.
Well, wait a second.
Go on.
Alex, what's the other side of the coin?
What do you mean?
She's a saint. She's increased employment. She's eliminated crime.
She's helped a lot of residents of Seattle. Their lives have improved because she pushed a bunch of reforms that actually worked as a socialist.
Wait a second. So is she a mayor?
No, she's a city council member.
Yes, but why would they want to remove her?
Has enough. Well, because she's raising.
No. You're giving me that's one side. What does the campaign say that's trying to get rid of her?
Well,
why do they say they want to get rid of her?
She was part. Remember the chat? Oh, you weren't around for that. You remember?
The Chad. Yeah.
He was involved in that, so they partly blame her for.
Oh, she was soft on the people who did the Chad.
She led a demonstration to City Hall, and they've been claiming,
so she was like an anarchist. She like burn down the city.
She's like the July 6th people.
So she represented anarchy, and that's why people wanted or a movement came to.
Real reason again.
What did she do that was good? What did she do that was good?
What did she do? Tax Amazon.
What did she do that was good?
She raised their minimum wage to $15, and which was very. They've increased taxes on their millionaires, and again had they actually implemented a corporate a raise in the corporate tax
the city tax on corporations.
Yeah. Because again, there was enough public support for it that the Democrats had to go along with her essentially.
Okay.
And it wouldn't happen because the Democrats, they're the usual establishment corporate types, so they had to be really strong-armed into doing it, and she was a big part of that, as Dennis can tell you.
All right, okay. Alex, I have to take exception to the usual quote corporate types with your aspersion to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, in my experience, is filled with all sorts of different kinds of people politically. Now, I do not doubt that given the kind of system we live in, that it is vulnerable and conducive to moneyed interests exerting their power. That's an objective fact. However, there is a difference between the GOP and the GOP at a certain level. Now, what's so interesting in the GOP these days is that some of their own theorists are talking about how they're building up a working class movement with their reactionary politics. And that's sort of an interesting question. as to what we're seeing right now. Is that true? I don't know. I mean, do I think that's completely that way? No, of course not. Certainly not in New York City, but in other parts of the country, maybe at certain situations that applies. But I think that to generalize a Democrat, I mean, who again, the question of mass movements is I just don't see a vanguard workers' party. Dennis, I just don't see it happening right now. The social conditions may exist for it, but I don't see DSA. DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, they I think are they see themselves as that kind of movement. But I don't see them sitting there if you have the right wing get more armed militant, get more brown shirtish. I don't see the DSA being able to deal with that. But I could be wrong. You got comments on that?
Dennis?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
No, I don't see the left mobilizing. I don't think I just don't see the left mobilizing right now, and we put too much stock in the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is led by Biden, and Biden is a reactionary. He's not doing what we need him to do. So no, we're stuck, and the right is encroaching, and no, I agree with Jim.
There you go. Well, Jim, rather than bring up something else, let me ask you: do you feel like the squad? I think it's 7 people now, not 4. Being the left of the Democratic Party in the House, do you think their actions are beneficial, bringing about an improvement?
Well, I support the squad. I mean, sometimes some of their bullshit. Sometimes I think they can. Let's say the one from Michigan. Every once in a while, what's her name again? Alex.
Elon Omar.
Well, Elon's from Minnesota.
Rashida Tlaib.
Rashid sometimes can be a little outrageous, but I basically think that it's great that they're in the Congress. I mean, to have those ideas actually openly talked about on the House floor is quite amazing. And remember, AOC Schumer is afraid that AOC is going to run for Senate,
right?
And he's always trying to mimic her. Now, whether she could actually win in New York State,
I know she wouldn't do well upstate. Let's put it.
Yeah, she got clobbered upstate. Yeah. And so one has to be realistic about the political appeal of these people. I think what's been interesting is they've had to work with Pelosi, and Pelosi, what are the part of the art of politics? The art of politics is to compromise, is to balance different interests out. And so the squad has been forced to deal with that. The Progressive Caucus, led by that congresswoman from the South Asian congresswoman from
Jayapal.
Yeah, Jayapal. She's pretty. She's. I mean, they're practical, and someone like the Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, I think he's going to develop into a possible. They look on him as a possible majority leader in the House, which could definitely happen. Again, I think with all these Americans who have these different attitudes about us, it's sort of like when you talk to an anti-vaxxer. Okay, you got to sort of, hey, I love you anyway, you dumb asshole, but you're still my butt, you're still my compatriot, you're still my compadre. Like we can have differences, but we have to talk them out, and that really applies to the kind of divisions happening right now politically in the United States. I don't want to see the Republicans take a majority, and Alex, I just say again, unfortunately, I'm probably the only guy here who's actually had experience on Capitol Hill, and trust me, going down to Capitol Hill and working was like a big leap for me, because
I said, my God, how can I trust these guys? They're all going to be sitting there dangling as puppets in the in who gives them the most money. Now, a lot of them are like that. You go into a congressional office on Capitol Hill. I used to have to go into one guy who was from Louisiana, who was in charge of the communications committee. He was a wheeler dealer. You go in there, places filled with lobbyists coming in and out of that place. It's like a little energy haven. But then, of course, you come across congressmen who do remind you of the, Jimmy Stewart in that movie. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, based on an actual person from Montana, by the way. That's the model for that person in that movie. So you actually meet people who run for Congress. I mean, if I hadn't been a bad boy when I was younger, I would probably have they wanted me to join the Democratic Party in 1973, and it was sort of an entry level. I had to run for the Constitutional Convention of the Democratic Party in New York State, and I looked at this guy who was recruiting me. He was with the Village Independent Democrats in the West Village.
Okay, yeah.
Spain. He fought in Spain in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. He was the father of a childhood friend of mine who was a Jew for Jesus who became an LSD dealer, right? And and all of a sudden he comes up to me in the street and says, "Jim, would you like to run for this position?" And I looked at him. I said, "You know the kind of shit I've done, man? Forget it." I mean,
what were you doing at the time, Jim?
Talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. But anyway, people I know actually did certain things so they could be credible to run for electoral office. And I personally support young millennials who want to work and actually run for Congress. I'm all in favor of progressive candidates running for local office positions in the country. I think that's great. And I'm happy to sit there and do the shit work for them to help them get elected.
And what about the all these Proud Boys and everybody else who's running for office?
Those kind of guys.
What about them?
Well, we'll see how they do.
We got to do something to stop that.
Well, we do, yeah, but we got to talk to them too. Look, Kenny, I'm a gun nut. I'm sort of a mild gun nut, but I can talk to gun nuts. So I don't mind handling and talking to gun nuts because, I was a gun nut too when I was younger. I just don't think that any idiot should go off and be able to buy an automatic weapon in the United States. I think that's idiocy.
Mm-hmm.
But, the problem that you have with those guys is they will get into this white racist bullshit, and you got to sit there and fight it out with them right away. You just cannot accept that. There's ways to do that, but not everybody. I look at the jerks I have to deal with in Pacifica. Some of them, some of them, some of them, I don't have to tell you this, Kenny, some of them are just like, they're walking cartoons. Some of these guys. I mean, they really are. They how could they communicate to even a moderate conservative to try to persuade them? They can't. Mm-hmm. They just are incapable of doing that because they're so self-absorbed. And you got to get out of that. You got to sit there and try to treat someone who politically doesn't think the same way you do as a human being, and deal with them. And usually my best way to deal with that is to talk about football. Let's divert the subject into sports. That's why you got to know about sports, because that's a good way to diffuse a hostile situation with another person politically when you're arguing. Let's talk about the Giants. Let's talk about the Yankees. I don't like to talk about the Mets. But you got to be able to do that kind of stuff. And if you're not able to do that, some political organizers ain't shit because they can't do that. They don't have the ability to flexibly communicate to someone who completely disagrees with them.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. So, yeah, that's how I'd handle the Proud Boys and all those guys. I mean, sure, a full-blown Nazi, forget about it. I don't know if I could. That's where I draw the line. But I've interviewed guys like that. You let them say their crazy shit. You don't, okay, you want to talk. I mean, they'll come out with the most whacked out stuff you ever heard in a million years. Mm-hmm. I actually played them on Pacifica. My approach would be let them say their crazy shit. And then after they say their crazy shit, I've said, well, I did not suppress your ability to say that crazy shit. I don't say it like that, of course. Then you sit there and go at them. But, It's a hard thing. It's hard to say. Michael, you're sort of quiet right now. Michael's.
There he is. He's listening.
On the show? No, I'm kidding. What do you want me? What do you want me to comment about? I mean, about the Proud Boys and things like that.
No, yeah. Who's going to take over the political agenda? The lefties or the righties?
Well, Jim, you can talk to the Proud Boys. I'd rather rumble with them. I mean, but whatever it is, the problem is that these. With the right wing, what we're seeing happening here, the difference between the right wing extremists and the left wing extremists, okay, forgetting about the politics itself and whether or not we agree with it. Obviously, we all would rather agree with the left wing extremists than the right wing extremists. But the difference is the left wing extremists do have an agenda. They think things through. Let's face it, they're smarter. I mean, the problem with
Yes, I understand. They're not bigoted. They don't have fixed ideas about people who disagree with them.
Well, I mean, put it this way, they don't have.
I mean, the left is sane. The left is not bigoted. They don't consider people who disagree with them as being stupid, drunken scumballs. They don't have that. They don't have that opinion about the right.
Right, and I think that
they're civilized.
The right. Well, I mean, the Proud Boys.
The Proud Boys.
I remember a friend of mine who was actually more towards the right, and when he heard about the Proud Boys, he said he thought it was like a gay gang, a bunch of gay guys, Proud Boys. They no women allowed. He was saying, I'm a little suspicious of those guys. But the fact is that, but these guys, what are we talking about? People that would, they can't really talk about much in any type of informed.
All right. Look, all right. Well, Michael. Now, Michael, I have to interrupt you because I've actually had to.
Wait. They can talk about things, not just football or anything, but they talk about things at a very when I say grassroots, a very Oh,
come on, man! You know what I'm talking about. Look, I once covered. I had to go cover a demonstration the Proud Boys had. All right, I was sent with press credentials. I was sent with a New York Police Department pass. And so they actually were guarding themselves with sentries. It was a trip. So I go up to one guy, and he says to me, well, who are you with? And I said, well, I'm with Pacifica Radio. And he says, well, who are those guys? He didn't know who I was, right? And I then said, well, I believe that you have the right to express yourself completely. And I'm not going to censor you. And he says, I like that. So I then went in and talked to their leaders. And these guys were like, one guy was sitting there, they were sitting there baiting the sectarian left groups that were divided by the police department of New York City by literally 5 or 6 rows of barricades. It was funny as hell. And they were on the other side of the street. And so you had actually one sectarian group, the Spartacus Youth League. They were combined in a phalanx kind of group of 20 guys. And they'd sit and scream and yell at each other across the street, across the barricade. They would curse each other out. The Proud Boys, of course, were unexpurgated. They basically were saying, your women are this. I don't want to repeat all the crap they said. They were just too much. And then the Proud Boy leader got up and claimed that his father had built the Brooklyn Bridge when he came from Italy in 1905, right? Now, I'm sitting with a cop, and the cop says to me, he starts laughing, an Irish cop, he says, oh, that's really ridiculous. The Brooklyn Bridge was long in built. This guy's too much. I didn't even know when the Brooklyn Bridge is built. And he's saying, my grandfather came from Calabria, and he was at the Brooklyn Bridge in 1905, building it with other white European workers. And then the cop's laughing. He says, they already built the goddamn Brooklyn Bridge. So, the Proud Boys are You know, you just have to let them have their. They do their own damage when you talk to them, but you still have to deal with the fact that there are a lot of alienated people, white, black, Hispanic, Asian American, Native American, period, in America
Wait,
right
hold on. Is this the case you're making for that they're actually just as intelligent as the far left?
Well, the question of the far left, I mean, I would be the last person in the world to say the far left is completely intelligent. I think that, I mean, some of them are, look, when you're around some people who think and worship the weathermen, I mean, like they think the weathermen are like the greatest thing since sliced bread. They're people in Pacifica who essentially are devoted to their hero worship of the weathermen, which I find I cannot personally get behind. That's not something I can go.
That's I'm talking. You're talking about the politics. I'm talking about the intellectual capacity or the educational level or something. In other words, I'm talking about in other words, when I'm talking about intelligence, I'm not just talking about IQ. I'm talking about the
Well,
ability to use intelligence.
all right. Yes, of course. What's ridiculous is the media. You got to mute yourself, Michael. You have no control of the sound. It's like forget it. It's like ridiculous what's going on with that sound in the background. Uh, the left itself. Uh, sometimes I remember when I would be around highly educated reactionaries. Well, highly educated. I'm talking about guys with Ivy League pedigree and all that kind of stuff. They would be a lot of fun to argue with because they're smart. However, their disdain, their contempt for poor and oppressed people was like out of bounds. Out of bounds. Their inability to empathize. They would come out with stereotypes. Oh, they're all welfare chiselers or things like that. And we're talking about somebody, somebody who was, very well. I'm talking about a Yale graduate, a Harvard graduate, and so that problem right there delineates when you're talking with someone on the left. I'm not talking now the left, the way the media uses it, because they think, you talk to some middle centrist Democrat, he's a member of the left. It's ridiculous the way they use those terms in the mainstream media, the left, the right. They're meaningless. Like sometimes, they're not. I mean, everyone here, like Dennis and Alex and yourself, Michael and Kenny, like in Pacifica, like you're dealing with the sectarian left, or you're dealing with the reality of sectarian left. But that is an extremely small amount of people in the United States, extremely small. And but I do that. Well, I guess where I differ from some is I do have faith in the goodwill of basic instincts of the American public. I do. Call me naive, but I do. I've seen it manifest itself, and I think that can be appealed to. I can be worked with, even with the religious ones. Even with religious ones, because you can use religion to sort of as a weapon against them. You know, which I I must admit, just to sort of talk finally, my last comment on this is many years ago, I would have arguments with people about programming at BAI, and one of the arguments I would make was I said, look, we have to deal. This is along the lines of when Dennis talks about Reverend Barber. I would argue that, well, what have we done in terms of handling the issue of the evangelical Christians? We haven't really done much. We haven't really appealed to left theologians who are out there in the body politic. We've not talked to them. And then I would get someone would hit back at me. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, look, how many Americans in the past 20 years have converted to evangelical Christianity as opposed to Marxism, Leninism? I mean, come on. Like you're going to say you ignore this? Because the reality is, of course, obviously millions converted to evangelical Christianity as opposed to hundreds or thousands or, whatever number became outright sectarian Marxist Leninists. So, one has to sit there and develop something the same way we're going through homegrown American fascism. We have to develop homegrown American socialism and radicalism. Something that does not alienate the roots of the richness and the conflicting narratives of American history. The left has not ever come out with a synthesis that's satisfactory as far as I'm concerned. That's why we're having these ridiculous fights about teaching history. You know, because who's not going to teach about slavery? It's ridiculous, inane, insane to not have anybody have a common working knowledge about the impact of slavery on American society and history and values. It's ridiculous. We fought a civil war over slavery. But to have these articles and attitudes and values at this point denigrated the way they are, and looked at the way they're used politically as weapons in the races in Virginia. Critical race theory was absurd. It was absurd to watch this. Absurd. It's an insult to the intelligence and common sense of the public of this country. And I think
Jim, I have to say that you're wrong about one thing. That
I'm never wrong, Michael.
Well, people who are never wrong are usually always wrong. Don't say that. So the far, if you want to say the far left, the socialist parties, the communist parties, the various, you can say remember the Communist Party were the ones that were first on board defending the Scottsboro Boys.
That's right.
In the labor movement, you had these, again, for the time, people who were considered on the far left, who were the ones who were reaching out to form unions, and they were reaching out to people in West Virginia. I mean, they weren't reaching out. They weren't taking an elitist attitude. They were reaching out to regular, dirt farmers and things like that, or people who came from families of dirt farmers who were working in factories workers. So historically, it may not be the case now, but historically, people who were considered far left at the time did reach out to, let's say, the quote unquote, if I can use I hate to use this elitist term, the common man. But they did reach out to them. That's where they were doing their organizing.
Right.
They need to get back to that.
Well, I think you're right about that. The Communist Party did grow tremendously during the Depression. And it wasn't until the Hitler-Stalin Pact of 1939 that the communist movement all over Europe and in the United States lost. I think the CP lost about a third of its members at that point, because when Hitler signed the pact with Stalin. But yes, you're right. One of the things that you see in the younger historians who write about the Depression and radicalism in America is that they do indeed emphasize that issue. The question of how do you view the Communist Party? And their argument, they go a little bit too far. They tend to disconnect it from its integration into Soviet foreign policy, frankly, because the Communist parties, we know the Comintern was a real force politically. The Communist International was a real force, especially after it's reinstituted and reconfigured by Lenin after the Bolshevik Revolution. And so the question of working class movements and how they independently operate in societies, and how or not, the whole issue of blindly following the dicta of the Soviet Union, which I think is a legitimate criticism of the CP. Because how many times did I ever argue with people who blindly followed either the Soviets, or they blindly followed what they thought was the best thing to get from communist China? I mean, I can imagine, I used to laugh when I would sit there and argue with people of the Revolutionary Communist Party who sat there. I teased them when the Gang of Four was put on trial, when the Cultural Revolution was purged. I used to say, well, you guys are jerks. I mean, you just basically are sitting there like, you're waiting for Madam Chang Ching to tell you what to do. I mean, give me a break. That stuff you cannot communicate to the average American. They don't want to hear it. The anti-communism in American culture is a very strong and real force. It cannot be underestimated. And, look, and certain people stay within certain political silos forever. Pacifica's swarming with people like that, who don't have common praxis in these kind of conflicting situations. They don't go out and try to persuade white working class racist Americans to change their minds. If they did, we might have advanced ourselves a little more. They never do that. And so what we're left with after 50 to 60 years of neglect of those issues is we're left with a situation we're in right now, which is not a good situation. And, you know, that's all I got to say about that. Someone else jump in, then we can close out.
Yeah, on that cheery note.
Yeah, we should. We're past 11.
Let's close it off for today and come back next week.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. 15th of December. Maybe we'll do one on Friday. I don't think you guys will be around. We were joined in California with Ken Aaron. We had Dennis Goldstein out in New Jersey, myself and Alex Stavropoulos in the great city of New York. And stay tuned and stay armed intellectually and politically.
Jankowitz.
Oh, wait a second, hold it. Is that something against Queens?
All right, Queens. I'm sorry. Mr. Jankowitz.
Hey, Mike Jankowitz is standing for Queens. As a matter of fact, I'll stand for all the outer boroughs of New York City at this point. Go on.